Mike, Mike's okay.
Okay, I think we might kick on with this. Good afternoon and welcome to everybody to our 6th and final webinar of the Get Rare Aware campaign. The aim of this campaign is, I guess, as it says on the tin, to try and help to drive awareness of rare diseases generally and people living with rare diseases across the country, both in our communities where we're living and also among, I guess, leadership and politicians across the health service and in the Dáil and in the government. And really it's to try and raise the profile, because as many people living with rare diseases know, we're often maybe forgotten about it and feel a little bit neglected. But if we can help to raise awareness of rare diseases, generally speaking, we hope that we'll be able to raise all the boats for everybody living with rare diseases. The campaign this year is specifically around that diagnostic journey for people living with rare diseases. As many of you will have experienced, diagnosis can be a very long and lonely path for people. Our survey published at the beginning of last year showed that 37% of people living with rare diseases spend over 5 years trying to achieve a diagnosis. And it's a very lonely journey for people. During that time frame, you might be given the wrong diagnosis and treated maybe for another condition, potentially harmful treatments, although hopefully not in most cases. You'll also maybe have challenges around if you're a young family with young children, do you go on and have further pregnancies? So, the delays in diagnosis have a huge impact on families and on individuals living with rare diseases. So we need to try and do something to expedite that diagnostic journey and ensure people are getting onto the right treatments and getting the right care as quickly as possible. This campaign then is around ensuring that the government delivers on their promises in the programme for government that they published back in June or July 2020. At that stage, the government indicated that they would provide support to the genetic services, the National Genetic Services at Crumlin Children's Hospital. That's the primary reference centre for people living with rare diseases, adults and children alike, that they would go into Crumlin Genetics. And we know from our research again that over 70% of people that are actually getting access to genetics will receive a genetic diagnosis and will get a root cause diagnosis for their condition and their symptoms. So if we can do something to ensure that people are getting through genetic services relatively quickly, we should be able to reduce that 5-year time period. Unfortunately, our genetic services are very underfunded and under-resourced at the moment. In fact, we have about half the number of people working in our genetic services in Dublin, in Crumlin, compared to our contemporaries in other countries, and in particular in Belfast and Northern Ireland. Our waiting list down here in Dublin is about 2 years, and typically it's less than a year. And again up in Belfast, our nearest neighbour, they are down to a handful of weeks at this stage. It was 3 months when we started the campaign. That's what they were reporting at that stage. That coming from just before Christmas, and recently they've actually indicated that they're down to a couple of weeks now. So there's a lot that can be done. I would have to say that the people that are working in the service today are working their very hardest to try and, I guess, get the changes that we need and to expedite the process, but simply it's a challenging environment. And part of it is around, I guess, the resources that are available. Part of it are around the technologies and tools that are available, simple things like booking systems and stuff like that we don't really employ yet at the HSE, but hopefully will come. But notwithstanding, I think it is important that we do build a service now upon which we can implement the new genetics and genomics strategy. That strategy was published at the end of last year, and there's currently an implementation plan being developed for implementation of that strategy. The implementation plan will be over a number of years, and we really want to expedite the waiting lists at this stage so that we can ensure that we're not entering into a new world, I guess, of genetics and genomics in Ireland with extended waiting lists already in place. We want to reduce those waiting lists, bring them down as much as possible, and then embark on a new, I guess, era of genetics and genomics in Ireland through the strategy that was developed at the end of last year, published at the end of last year. So today I have with me, Julie Sweeney, a mum living down in Cork, whose son was diagnosed in, I think she said 2020. We're just discussing it, but was diagnosed a couple of years ago with a 22q deletion syndrome, and also by Professor David Keegan at the Mater. David is a consultant ophthalmologist at the Mater Hospital and has led out on many things around genetics for people living with vision impairments in Ireland. So I'm going to start with David and maybe just pose the question, David, why is genetics important in your field? Why is the diagnosis so important? What does it do for you?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak and share some of our musings. And I'll put a disclaimer in early. We don't have all the answers, but we'll chart out our journey. And I suppose, look, genetics is very important because fundamentally we want to get a diagnosis for a number of reasons. So we reference here a paper taken by Graham Black and his team. Graham Black's ocular geneticist in Manchester. He published a paper around ophthalmology in 2016. And really, it lays out a very clear roadmap that we've developed off Target 5000, and we published sort of the pathway paper about 2 years ago. And really off that was patients want to get a diagnosis because they want to know what they have. They want to get a prognosis based on the current literature about what lies in store for them. They want to be able to access the appropriate services that they need around that diagnosis. So it might be just an eye condition, as devastating as that is. But then you've got other issues. If the diagnosis ends up as being part of a syndrome, well, then you may need to access cardiac services, rheumatology services, urology services, etc. So patients want to know that sort of information, as do their doctors working with them, so they're not broadsided down the line. The next thing is really then, once you have your diagnosis, and from all my conversations with patients, now Julie talked more about this than I'm not a parent. I'm not somebody with a genetic condition per se, because we all have genetic alterations, but I don't have a genetic condition, and nor anybody in my family. But you don't need to spend long in the company of those affected by genetic disorders to realize how important that diagnosis is to move to the next phase of the management of them personally or medically with the condition and their livelihood. So that's for them. And then the next step then is, and as outlined in that paper by Graham Black, are the psychological supports necessary to go. So you've got your medical supports and then the psychological supports that are necessary to come in on board that to support the person suffering or are affected and the family affected. The next part of it then was, well, why is a genetic diagnosis important? Well, certainly if you know what you're dealing with, can you affect it? Okay, so can you introduce a disease modifying agent, which we're classically talking about now as precision medicine or gene therapy. So can you alter the course of that primary condition? So there's an interest in that, obviously, and that's where we tend to spend a lot of our time now currently because of new gene therapies. But I feel you've got to go through those other steps first before you can start opening that conversation to therapeutics. Then as part of that is comorbidity management. Once you've got your diagnosis, you can predict comorbidity. It's part of the prognosis conversation. And then you manage the comorbidities. So for us in ophthalmology, things like, well, can you manage their glasses? And do they need glasses? Can they cataract, swelling of the retina? So all these things help improve vision function, but it goes across the board. So if to summarize, a genetic diagnosis, and I have to say, I gave a talk on this within my profession in October 2022, and this will be shocking for your audience. There was a lot of, what does it matter? Like, how does it change? We can't treat that underlying condition. So that's why, so forgive me, and thank you for the indulgence of letting me build up to that disease modifying statement. And I deliberately now put that at the end, because it's, you go through this sequence, and that's been my own learning. I started off the exact same: get the gene, affect the gene, treat. But what I've learned as we've recruited, you know, we've now looked after about 1,000 patients here at the Mater with genetic eye disease, retinal disease, that we've brought in over the year. We've now got accredited testing for nearly all of them and access to a counsellor. But the big thing I've learned is the first bit of that statement is, you get the diagnosis, then you have management. It also creates other levels of expectation. As myself and the team are also learning, because once you get, so somebody has gone from thinking they've got a mono-organ disease, just an eye condition, then you make a diagnosis, say something like Bardet-Biedl syndrome, where there's a number of organs affected. Now they're on our case to, okay, where's my urology appointment? Where's my heart appointment? Where? And now, so that creates that new, but that's what we've to do, we to respond to that need. So yes, to my colleagues out there, I think a genetic diagnosis isn't that important. It is so vitally important. And that's why we're proud to have reduced the wait time from 6 years down to 3 months. Now,
super.
Genetic diagnosis.
Yeah. I should, for people listening in, I should note that David has actually set up a lab within his hospital that he's got it down to 3 months, but we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. Julie, I might bring you in here. Tell us a little bit about your journey to diagnosis.
Yeah, as David said there, I suppose it started with, you know, one thing, and little did we know the road that we were facing into. So my son Connor was born healthy pregnancy, you know, straightforward delivery, born in 2010, and very quickly within 6 months presented with his first chest infection, which I would look back now and I would say that was the first of a couple of years of really, really horrendous infection after infection and so forth. And it took 6.5 years for us to end up with our genetic diagnosis, which is a syndrome. He has 22q11 deletion syndrome, and it is a multi-organ, you know, it can affect various parts of the body. So it is a huge diagnosis for us, and it meant that we had to undergo multiple screening tests at post-diagnosis. So yeah, it's not to be dismissed. It's a huge diagnosis, and it has a big impact on the family.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. You said to me previously, when we spoke previously, Connor was sick on and off for a number of years, and then it wasn't until he was in school essentially that you were beginning to get the language that you needed to actually work out, how do we get a diagnosis? What's going on here? Yeah,
he first got sick at 6 months and was in and out of hospital for the next two years essentially. You know, repeated chest infections, febrile convulsions, multiple admissions via ambulance call-outs. I do remember a doctor at one stage saying, God, like, he's a real medical mystery, isn't he? But didn't do anything with that, you know, just kind of set it out to the parent and just left it, you know. They did at one stage in one hospital, because we've been to a number of hospitals. So at one stage he was screened for cystic fibrosis again, but it was very much rule it out and rule it in. They screened for autoimmune deficiencies. You know, I was bringing this little 2-year-old up and down to the hospital for full blood counts. He hated, you know, getting it done. And when they came back inconclusive, those appointments just seemed to peter out. There was no follow-up. Nobody really kind of sat up and said, okay, you know, these standard tests aren't throwing anything up. We need to look at genetics. Nobody said that to me. So aged 5, Connor started language class in a local school about 15 kilometres away from us. He wasn't able to start in his local primary school with his peers from preschool. His speech was so badly affected. He was diagnosed with severe expressive language delay, DLD, developmental language disorder. He had traits of verbal dyspraxia, although it's very hard to get a diagnosis from the HSE for that. So he wasn't verbal at all at 5 years of age. He went to school, couldn't say his name, couldn't introduce himself to his teacher, couldn't come home and tell us anything about school, couldn't tell us about his new friends, about how his day went. He was...
Oh, we've lost Julie there. Sorry, guys. Her connection is cutting in and out. We'll just give her a couple of seconds because normally it comes back relatively quickly, and we might get a little bit more on this piece. Here we go. She's going to be back again.
No, I'm back.
Really?
Sorry,
Okay.
it just
Yeah,
keeps jumping out. So he was completely pre-verbal starting school. He went to a language class, and it was his SLT there. Now, Connor would have been engaged in SLT from the age of 2, because I saw he was pre-verbal. I knew he was having severe language issues. So although we were engaged with SLT services from the age of 2, it was when he went to language class and he met his 5th SLT therapist. And within a matter of, I suppose, a couple of months really, she suggested to me that we have a paediatric review for Connor, and we have somebody look at his case file and, really review him top to bottom. So I went back to my GP and I had the language to ask for a paediatric review. So I was referred to neurology in CUH, and that appointment would have happened March 2020, just as COVID hit. We managed to get in for that appointment before kind of shutdown happened. And the neurologist would have, ran multiple tests on that day. I remember they took vials of blood off the child. I came home and told my husband, they were like 13 vials of blood later. And eventually, because I suppose COVID did impact our pathway, so the bloods were drawn in March 2019. Our 6-month follow-up to that was actually over the phone because of COVID. We weren't allowed into the hospital. I got some results out in a letter. And I remember saying this to you, Vicky, nothing to me. So I had a teleconsult and they explained what those results were, but I wasn't actually aware that there were still results outstanding. So when we finally got back into the hospital in February 21, for what I thought was going to be a fairly routine appointment, I was on my own because of COVID restrictions with Connor. So here I was, 6.5-year-old boy looking for my attention in the clinic as well, on my own, and I was landed with this diagnosis completely out of the blue for us. Wasn't expecting anything as serious as this. I remember the consultant talking about scoliosis and heart defects, and Connor was pulling my hand looking for my attention for something, and I was just there in my head thinking, God, like I'm supposed to be processing it and trying to think of the questions to ask, and he's looking for something. It was really, really, really tough to take that in. I was given a handout to bring home to my husband. It wasn't even photocopied in sequence, very, very negatively framed. And I had to come home and explain to my husband that my son had this rare condition. Nobody had ever heard of it. The GP hadn't heard of it. And we were just left to sit until our next hospital appointment. We weren't given any signposting to supports. So it was really, really tough diagnosis in the middle of COVID. And I suppose they do tell you the first thing you don't do is don't Google, but I did. And, I thank God that I did, because I myself found then, my own community within the 22Q community online. Met the wonderful Anne Lawler of 22Q Ireland, and, found out there was a clinic in Crumlin that I could attend. So I rang back the consultant in CUH looking for that referral myself. So it was really tough to process. And, in hindsight, a very, very important genetic diagnosis to get.
Yeah. Julie, or sorry, not Julie, David, I'll just loop back. Julie mentions there about the support that she then got from 22Q Ireland. And I'm sure, David, you've met Anne Lawler over the years, as have many people out there, a great advocate for people living with rare diseases, generally speaking. That must be something that you do with your own patients, and is to point them in the directions as to there's other things out there.
Yes, actually, I don't know, I probably can't share the screen, but I was going to pull up a slide. I was just listening to Julie talk through there. And you got to remember, like, I'm presenting a pathway that we've developed over the last few years, and we've made our mistakes and we've iterated, but we've listened. I would, for to sort of say, we haven't always got it right. I personally haven't always got it right. And I know I've been pulled up by people who I now am friends with who have rare diseases, and they'll tell me the times that we've got it wrong. But as long as we keep learning, and Julie's hit on a few of those key points there, that lack of communication of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then when the result comes back. So there's certain things that we brought into place over the years as we did this. And again, it went back to Graham's paper. Maybe I'll share the screen if I can share it. No, it says it's disabled. Maybe if you can enable the screen sharing, I'll just pull up a pathway. It goes back to Graham's paper, because we were just doing clinics, but it gave us, and we accelerated. And Graham often thanks us for referencing his paper so much, because he thinks we've taken it to another level. But that's the whole point, and then it becomes iterative. But I was also working with National Council for the Blind in Ireland about supporting patients who have I can't quite, whatever way that comes up.
I think I can share the screen, but David, if you want to send it to me, I'll try and pull it up in an email. From an email.
You know what? It may end up, I probably lose the punch, but yeah. We had supporting patients with vision impairment just generally. So with an eye clinic liaison officer, and it's like a traffic signpost. So they just talk to the patients a lot, and like, what do we need about sorting your vision out so that we get access to technology and supports and financial support. So I had a summer student did a lovely project with me. Where was the gap analysis on vision supports in this country? So one of the ones, none of the sight loss agencies tackled financial support or financial independence. So people with their financial affairs, it's more difficult to go to your family members and friends. So they closed off that gap. But the eye clinic liaison officer puts people in the direction really of accessibility, so for reading materials, etc., and living their life, and mobility, and how they might help with things like cane training or guide dog training, etc. So, and then what we also then, with the support of fighting blindness, so that was NCBI, put that into our clinic, and now there are 5 ECLOs across the country, which is great. So then we put one in Temple Street, and we put one in the Eye and Ear, and now there's one going into Cork and one going into Limerick. And then next after that, we also have a genetic counsellor. So how do you give back the report? As good as we think we are as medics, and I've had an interest in the field and doing it for 15, 20 years, the genetic counsellors are trained to do this. And Jackie Turner, who we've had the real pleasure to work with. But the reason Jackie approached us to work is because I presented at the Irish Society for Human Genetics. I presented our pathway, and of course Jackie goes, "You're missing somebody like me," and she comes up and approaches us to come and work with us. So then I'd try and encourage all my clinical colleagues is get out there and talk. People need to know about you. And Fighting Blindness helped support Jackie for 3 years, and then we moved Jackie from a patient organization supported post to a HSE funded post. And now, because the Matter through the central genomic strategy has support now for a number of adult posts around cardiac and ophthalmology, we can now grow out the genetic cancer support to 1.2 whole-time equivalents. And that'll support that, and also support neurology. And now we've got support for cardiology then here for adult germline testing. I do need to confess one thing. Vicky probably overplayed me there a little bit about setting up the lab. The lab at the Matter is a multidisciplinary effort between ophthalmology, cardiology, metabolics, neurology, etc., and hematology. And Peter O'Gorman leads the lab, but we've been really indebted to Rita Shah and Oliver Brady, the late Oliver Brady from Shabra, who fundraised nearly €1 million for us to get all that equipment in. So we really, again, had to get the money from elsewhere. But what it's done now, we've got accredited testing for cardiac and for ophthalmology. A lot of our testing that has brought us up to speed, we have outsourced with the support from a company. So we have done that. So we're pulling from all angles. to deliver on our pathway. So now we have somebody who comes into us with what we suspect is an inherited retinal degeneration. We go through a detailed phenotype, then we go and send the genetic testing with pre-testing counseling, and then we get that result back in about 6 weeks. And then we do a multidisciplinary team meeting. We do an MDT of the scientists, the clinicians, because not all of these are readily resolved. As anybody involved in this, it's not a clear diagnosis like a 22q, as awful as that diagnosis to get. Like I was saying earlier on, you have it, you get it in the right context, move to the next phase about managing all of the issues that Sean has, to deal with. Same in eye disease. Sometimes we don't know if that gene is the right gene, so we've got to resolve these, or we get secondary findings. So we've put an MDT structure in place, but now we can support nationally through that MDT structure. So we've got our clinical geneticist, genetic counselor, ophthalmic genetics team, the laboratory scientist team then as well. And we're linked in with Jane Farrar's lab in Trinity. So if we can't resolve a case and it needs to go to an extra level of testing, and then sometimes we get feedback to a patient that we can't give a genetic diagnosis. But so the clinical care though goes on. So we'll manage all the comorbidities while the genetic resolution is going on, or else we move to what we call our green light database. So that's when we have access to approved therapies like Luxturna for RPE65 disease, or treatments that'll go to clinical trials. So now we've set up a whole clinical trials pathway then here as well. So there are about 8 or 9 different disease-modifying clinical trials going on globally that we can now plug our patients into. So of our 900 patients, we have 4 suitable for approved gene therapy. Some have gone abroad for that. And we have about 180 that would be suitable to be enrolled in a clinical trial. So
Wow.
Putting structure and organization on this, rapid access to genetic testing. And it's not just, I would venture, Nikki and Julie, it's not just genetic testing for its sake. You need that pathway in around it. That's what we've fed into the National Genomic Strategy. I know you're going to come on to that, which we really endorse. We want to see that moved on. We want that to be pathway-based, patient-focused, not research focused. We think now research is important, but the care comes from those pathways. And we have tried to say to the researchers, look, if we get our clinical house in order, let's look after Julie's family, let's go to all people with genetic disease. There's all the research opportunity falls from that. I would just like to see it flipped a little bit. It all comes from that. I probably talked too much there, Vicky, but it just...
Well, no. I think it's very interesting, David, what you do, and I think you're right in terms of you're doing the clinical piece, and as a result now you have patients that can feed into trials. It's not you're looking for patients to feed into trials. It's delivering the clinical service and then saying, well, actually, these ones might be eligible for trials, which is incredibly important.
On that point, can I just make one point? We were under a lot of pressure from companies early on to be very targeted testing, targeted genetic testing that companies would pay for. And I would venture to come under umbrella organizations like Rare Disease Ireland or Fighting Blind, under the big umbrella rather than splinter groups. I know there's a feeling that you'll only get the support from everybody who knows, but if everybody comes together, we lift all ships. We were approached a number of times that it was just we're looking for P65 disease and a narrow panel of 17. So no. We dug in our heels. It's everything. We'll look for everybody's condition. And I would suggest that, and then focus the funding then on genetic counselors to feed that information back.
Yeah. Julie, I see you smiling and laughing and ruefully kind of thinking, I wish I was in David's clinic.
Yeah, you mentioned there was 6 weeks and I was shaking my head.
And in fairness, you do have a good service out of Crumlin. Oh, we've just lost Julie again. We'll give her a second to come back on and I'll revisit that with her.
It is, remember, it's 6 weeks since we've got the pathway right, who we go to, and we've got the funding.
Yeah.
And it just has to be reliable. So.
Yeah, sorry, Julie. I was just going to say, I mean, you do in fairness have a good clinic now in Crumlin. I know 22Q Ireland have been very leading in that area in terms of getting a proper clinic set up. So I noticed, or not, I shouldn't say I noticed, I guess as part of Connor's diagnosis, there was a question around why does Conor have this anomaly in his gene profile, and that you then your family, everybody in the family was tested, and your husband came back as also being positive for or having.
Yeah. So that day back in February 21, when I was on my own in that appointment in the middle of COVID, the hospital would have indicated that both parents should have been screened now for this condition as well. We were reassured it's 90% de novo, only 10% of is inherited. So this was really just kind of standard procedure. So I had my bloods drawn on that day for testing. Didn't hear anything back, and it was actually when we went to Crumlin the following summer, the clinician there was able to tell me, well, your tests are back and they're negative. And I was like, nope, no, back up there. I didn't hear that. So, I got my clear, my all clear kind of as an aside. And then we kind of had to push for Jonathan's bloods to be tested. Now, it was a pediatric appointment for Conor, but they actually did do Jonathan's bloods while we were up. And that would have been the summer 2021. And then the hacking thing happened. So his file got lost in the system, and we were coming to the point of actually reading the bloods down in Cork. We were trying to figure out the logistics of it. When out of the blue, we got a call to come to Crumlin around Easter 2022, so around April maybe 22. So this is, full year after Conor's diagnosis. We were called up, and so we knew going up, we were told come up on our own, so we kind of knew what we were heading into. But I will say, and David, you mentioned about the, how you delivered the news and the wraparound support. So by this stage, Crumlin had a care coordinator in place for 22Q, Wesley Mulcahy. He's brilliant. So Wes and Suzanne Kelleher would have sat down together before we went up, and they discussed how to deliver the news to Jonathan. And it was really evident in that meeting, the thought process that went in. They were aware of how shocking and how distressing Conor's diagnosis was to us. So they were really, really empathetic in the way that they delivered that diagnosis, and then subsequently, because we now had a parental diagnosis, our other two children had to be tested as well. That was much quicker, so they would have been brought up, Jonathan was April, they were brought up in the August. And because it was targeted testing, their results came back in a matter of weeks, really. And they got the all clear, the two of them. So, but it was like from Conor's bloods initially being drawn in 2020, we weren't finished with the whole family genetic testing until well into the fall of 2022, so.
Yeah.
We're talking 2 years.
Two and a half
long
years.
Time. And it's, you're trying to process everything the whole time, and what are the implications, for us as a family. So, we were that really rare family who get the dual diagnosis of a parent getting diagnosed post child's diagnosis, but it's more common than what people realize. And I suppose then it kind of opened up a whole other question, because I suppose with Conor's diagnosis, we were very clear on, what screenings we had to follow through on. And, he had the cardiac, he had ENT, the renal, the immunology, the whole shebang. And so he was screened head to toe. And then it came to Jonathan's diagnosis, and we're like, okay, so, here we have a 40-year-old who's lived all his life, without knowing this condition. And, I suppose it did explain certain instances in his past. And I know it's his story to tell, but as a spouse, I suppose, Jonathan would have had hip surgery in 2019, and it was very much, we'll go in and treat this issue, and we could never get a reason why. Why was a 38-year-old man hip basically presenting as an 80-year-old hip. It was, he couldn't, he had very limited mobility. He got to the point where he was living in pain, chronic pain every day, and he had to have surgery. And they did tell us at the time, without knowing why, well, basically he does need a hip replacement, but he's too young. So we'll give him this intervention for now. hope to get him to his 50s, and then we'll do, maybe we'll do one then. But they were never interested in the why. So the 22q is the why, we know now. And it is important. It just goes to show why, why wasn't it queried, why this otherwise healthy 38-year-old man is presenting with chronic hip issue.
Yeah. It is. It's. I guess it's for you guys. It's kind of disappointing that wasn't pursued at the time, and now, as you say, you guys are dealing with the fallout of it. Definitely, David. I just want to come back to you again. I noticed from a lot of your description there. You were talking about your liaison officer, and that I think is the kind of stuff that we're looking for now within, that we would have something similar for I guess, generally speaking, in the genetics department, that somebody would be working within each regional health area or assigned to the regional health areas, not necessarily geographically located there, but that would be able to identify what supports are available in your community, and can we ensure that you're getting those types of services, or that you know where to access whatever you need. But I noticed from a lot of what you were talking about, it's all being kind of supported by NCBI, by Fighting Blindness, by patient organizations, doing fundraising and stuff. I'm like, I guess when I see that, and, I realize, NCBI and Fighting Blindness are big organizations that have a lot of resources and big capacity. But when you see all of these kind of like people living with, maybe a handful of people in the country with the condition, it's difficult to get that type of resource. And I guess, are the patient groups kind of like subventing innovation in the HSE at this stage? It seems to me a little bit like that.
A very good question. Look, we've run a model of getting something started, showing the benefit and the value it adds into our system. Invariably, the arguments with the HSE are around sort of financial, what else do you get back from somewhere else? So we can make a very solid argument. For example, the eye clinic liaison officer saves their doctor's time. So there's more patients can be seen by a doctor in the clinic. So unless you can actually put something like that on it, it's very hard to make the case. Now, those, in fairness to the HSE, we've been running ECLOs now for 5 years, and the HSE have taken on the funding of those ECLOs now. And now they're not countrywide yet, but they will be countrywide. Now, we shamelessly stole that idea from the Royal National Institute of the Blind in the UK and took it over. But interesting, it's not a model shown in Europe. So I chair the low vision patient group in the European Reference Network for Rare Eye Disease. So we're doing a survey across Europe at the moment on access to eye services. We're going to take Shauna Routledge, was the medical student who ran that access to services survey for me a couple of years ago. We're repeating that across Europe. So we're hoping to promote the eye clinic liaison officer across Europe as well to do that. So again, giving a bit back to all the support we've had from our European and British colleagues is that we do that back into it. Around the genetic counsellor, again, initially supported by Fighting Blindness. I promised them 3 years and then we'd switch to HSE funding. So 2 years and 10 months from Jackie started that, she switched onto a HSE contract. Our clinical geneticist was supported, but we never had to access that funding. That was enough. So basically they started, went onto it. So I think it's a good model, but you got to get up and running and show. You have to have clarity about what you want to achieve. So coming back to the niche groups, find the commonality of the need. Around genetic counseling, for example, everybody receiving a genetic diagnosis needs a genetic counselor. Now, whether, how we shift that in the future, whether the chronic shortage of genetic counselors is met by training and recruiting and deploying an army of genetic counselors, whether it's a senior genetic counselor working with clinicians who are interested like myself, and that we get more clinicians involved in delivering this sort of counseling advice, we might try and do that. I think that's a bit regressive in some respects, because I think it leads to that uneven knowledge giving. I think it undermines the value of a genetic counselor as well, and their professional status, what they do. I could not do what Jackie Turner does, and yet I've been involved in genetic eye disease for over 20 years. And Jackie's a trained genetic counselor. And it's that totality. It's not just around the eyes. What she brings, that knowledge of the syndromes, knowledge, obviously, the risk to the rest of the family members. So that situation where Jackie's sitting down with a young mother who, you know, who is, say, 32, she's got a child, just know quite like Connor's story, you don't quite know something, and mothers know when something's not quite right. And they're with a child, but obviously they want to have more children. So the need for that information is even more. We haven't even touched on that, but you can't wait 6 years for a diagnosis.
Yes.
So there's a case study I put in there on a Batten's disease, which is an awful condition to get it, but the parents were just convinced it was just an eye condition, just an eye condition. They couldn't see the other issues that were wrong because they didn't want to accept. But through our testing thing, it was Batten's disease. It was, so we were able to preempt it, getting the anti-seizure medication, getting the neurology team to see the child before their first seizure, not waiting for that first seizure to happen. As scary and everything is that now it didn't stop them, but we know we've ameliorated them. The child is still a seizure. So I know I'm speaking to the converted of this call. I want to add my own personal journey of coming at this. And I love, we've got an MDT on Friday. I look forward to them so much. I'm still learning, and I've got to be honest with my patients, I'm still learning at every single MDT at that. And so we just need to have structure around this. It needs to be sensible, it needs to be patient focused, it needs to have a pathway that's evidence-based, international standard. And actually, we're uniquely positioned in Ireland to be the best in class in this. Very proud of a paper of ours that came out last week. We know we have 85% of all patients with Usher syndrome in Ireland are known to our eye care services, and they have a genetic diagnosis. 85%. So the United States often big up their thing called My Retina Tracker. They have mapped 12% of their entire inherited retinal degeneration population onto that. So we are in a unique situation. That's why I want the focus to be on clinical services, and all that research glory that will come after that is there. And
yes, yeah. And research glory is what you're getting, David. And I think that, as you say, stealing practices from other locations and from other places. And I think we need to come back into your clinic actually and steal some of the things that have really worked for you to try and jumpstart development in other areas as well for other conditions and stuff.
And the stuff that hasn't worked. Oh, we've run into some.
Yeah.
But
no, absolutely. That's definitely part of what we should be doing with all of this. I have a comment that's come in from somebody whose son was diagnosed with a deletion 16p 13.2 in 2020 and has no genetic services or otherwise offered since. As far as this person knows, only one person, or only their son is the only person in Ireland diagnosed. David, what would you suggest that this person do? Chase their GP to get a referral?
Yeah, they need to see a genetic counsellor. They just to take this, or clinical geneticist. I presume that was diagnosed via Crumlin and the services there. I'd be surprised. Now in 2020, the services across the board fell off a bit of a cliff. We know, only because we had a structure, we moved to WebEx type of service. So all our pediatric work actually was done remotely.
Yeah.
We published that work just last year. Quite proud we moved to remote cheek swabbing, but you need to sit down with a genetic counsellor on this. When it's a very rare, ultra rare condition that this falls into that category, there will be knowledge of this. And actually, Caroline, if you can just give me 1 second, I actually have a web ahead of today. I had a web page open just in case. So that comes up. So there will be knowledge, and remember, there's resources like the NIH National Institute for Health Rare Disease Program in the US.
Yeah.
They will have knowledge in around this. And okay. So Caroline's put up about Temple Street Genomics Ireland. So it's the Genomics Ireland project. So that was a research project, Carol. So this is, I don't know what I can say on a public forum. So why we didn't go down this route, but we did start off a research project just about the accredited testing, so how that information comes back. So we just need to dig into where the accredited test was done and how that information has gone back to you. And actually, again, well-meaning at the beginning of our program was our link with Jane Farr's lab in Trinity, but they don't do accredited testing. And then it was getting the follow-up accredited testing. So that's been my learning. So you need to make sure, Caroline, you've had an accredited test done. Then that should be fed back to you by the clinical genetics team, counselor and or geneticist. Given it's so rare, the genetics involvement will be important. I don't know a huge amount about that condition myself, and I don't think I should be on a public platform. So once you map that out, then you've got all the different services that you need. So at least you know all the services you need to access. Those clinicians should get your son's diagnosis with the confirmation of the gene, with a short description of that and where their service fits in. If they don't feel that they can offer that service, the next port of call is looking for a European reference network access point into Europe. And that gives you access to a virtual clinic platform to start with, and then if necessary, then into a physical clinic. So the European reference networks are what we've signed up to in law to support these. So that has you into the European system. And as part of that group in rare eye disease, it is a fantastic network to do. And then beyond that, then if you need to travel, then there'll be access to treatment abroad scheme. And that'll be either classically we go to the UK, and like we're setting up our Bardet-Biedl syndrome MDT in conjunction with Prof. Beals in the UK, will be there. If they can't get you the necessary expertise in the UK, the next port of call will be to the rare disease services at the National Institute of Health in the United States. So I hope that answers your
I guess it's a reflection. Thank you very much, David. I didn't mean for you to go into that level of detail, but I guess, sadly, Caroline, you'll have to push, your own GP to get yourself back or your son back into the service to make sure that this is all followed up with, and as you say, the clinical diagnosis. But as David has alluded to, there is, I guess, stuff happening now beyond Ireland as well that we're linking into the European reference networks, which is part of the work that we've been doing. And then I wasn't sure that we had links into the NIH as well, but I guess that all makes sense. I think of all of the communities in terms of health communities, the rare disease community is really globally networked to try and make advances, because the recognition that if there is only a handful of patients around the world, the only way we're going to know how to deal with this or what works and what doesn't work is by networking all of that information together. And it is something that is progressing, I'm happy to say, and I'm happy to say that Ireland is plugged into a good bit of it. Julie, any final comments just before we close up?
Yeah, just listening to David talk there, and it brought me back to something I would have said to you, Vicky, as well. Getting the lingo from a professional about to know what to ask. David, you would have said to Caroline there,
Oops. We'll give Julie a second to get back in again. Sorry about this, guys.
Just while Julie's coming back, Vicky, there was another question in there about cross-border cooperation. I hope I answered that in relation to European reference networks.
Yeah. Again, sorry, apologies. I'm not at home and I'm not at my usual workplace. I was just saying there, David being able to give Caroline the language to ask, was my test an accredited test? Do I need to get an accredited test? That's hugely empowering for a parent to get that information, to know exactly what to ask for, to be able to come back to your clinicians, to your GP maybe with a little bit of confidence, a little bit of knowledge, and say, this is what I need to know. Otherwise, I suppose we are trusting in the system a lot. And as we know, the system is creaking, and we're relying on the likes of the bigger hospitals, be it Temple Street or Crumlin or CUH, doesn't matter. You bring your small child, your baby maybe, to this hospital, you're trusting in the professionals to be able to figure out what's wrong and then feed that back to you. That's a very important step, that is fed back to the family. And that sometimes very often actually is probably where it falls down from a family point of view. You know, I do remember, and David, you alluded to it there as well, about, you know, family planning and, you know, knowing what's going on for the family. When my own 15-year-old daughter was asked, because, you know, she was old enough to kind of have her own opinion, did she want to get tested or not? And she's very, very mature, and she would have said to me, well, ma'am, if I have it, could I pass it on to a child? And I said, well, yeah, if it's hereditary, you could. And she said, okay, so, you know, well, I know I want to have children, so why don't I just find out now? Why would I be waiting to find out? So, you know, she had a very, very mature approach to wanting to find out if she had this condition or not. You know, when she did her testing, she came back, she got an all clear. But, you know, I suppose I was finished with my family at that stage. Connor had been so sick when he was younger, you know, we couldn't contemplate continuing a family. And that was just from the sheer intensity of how sick he was, you know, in and out of hospital, up all night, you know, this child who was, you know, spent 3 months on the trot vomiting every night, you know, when you've putting on a round of laundry before you go to work, you're putting it into the dryer when you come home, you're making the bed again before he goes into bed to repeat it all again, you know, the following morning. And the intensity of that, you know, for us kind of made us, but I suppose we had 3 children at that stage. So, you know, that kind of was an easier decision for us to make. But for my daughter to kind of have that maturity, I think was very empowering for her to know, I need to know this now before I'd ever contemplating having a child, you know. And you know, what would have been the implications if she came back positive? You know, look, we didn't go there. We haven't, you know, it will impact Connor as he grows through life, and, you know, as an adult wants to form relationships and start a family himself. He's only 8 now, but I know genetic counselling is going to be important for him going forward. For his own life. So the services need to be there for him to be able to access that in a timely manner.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for that. So I think it's clear that there are pockets of excellence, like in the matter with David and some of his colleagues in some of the other areas of the matter as well, with some resources. And I would say that Crumlin is a pocket of excellence. It's just very difficult to get access to, because they are the national centre for the country, I guess, and a lot of people are ending up coming through there, and it's just they're overwhelmed, I guess. So I think, as David has alluded to there, the eye liaison officer, it's something a little bit similar that we're looking for, that would be made available in Crumlin for each of the new regional health areas as are defined in Sláintecare, that we would have somebody that would be available to people living in their region, that would actually be able to ensure that they are getting the types of supports, and that there's an access route in and an access route back in. Maybe in Connor's case, when he's old enough and says, I want to get access now, I want to know, and that, okay, you're living in this area, we'll get you back in through this person, and things like that, that they, I guess you would remain a patient of the genetic services lifelong, and you just say, I'm at a stage in my life where I'd like to now re-engage a little bit and learn a little bit more, that you're not discharged from genetics at any stage in life. And that
yeah, and I'll interject there, Vicky, sorry, just, you know, when we did meet the genetic counsellor, the way she was able to explain it to Connor's siblings when they were getting their testing done, she did it in a very professional, age-appropriate way, because she has the training, you know, as David alluded to earlier, you know, we all have our own niche expertise, and that was her expertise, and she explained it in a very, very age-appropriate way. And I think that's very important for the family as well, you know, that can be done. And as Connor ages up, you know, it mightn't be as long a way as when he wants to start a family. It might be when he has the, you know, as a teenager, maybe he wants to understand this condition more for himself. You know, what does it mean for me, to be able to get a few answers, maybe. You know, it's understanding your condition isn't all around family planning, and it is about understanding your condition as well. So that's a very important point as well.
Absolutely, Julie. Absolutely, Julie. And it can't always be, I guess, up to the parents to filter what they might think is appropriate, as opposed to, in fact, your child is now maybe turning into an adult, is transitioning to adulthood and needs to be able to make decisions on their own, and that's definitely part of it. So anyway, that's what this campaign is all about, ensuring that we get more resources to allow us to, I guess, build the genetics and genomic strategy, as has been alluded to over the course of the conversation, to build it on a firm foundation, and that we ensure that people that living with rare diseases and with genetic conditions in Ireland, that they're no longer waiting 2+ years for access to the services and interpretation of results, that they're getting a much quicker resolution of that journey, I guess, and that family members are getting in quickly and can get their answers too. So that is what this campaign is about. I would ask everybody who's online to please consider going onto the getrareaware.ie website. And in that, on that website, there's a take action, and just you simply need to put in your names and your email addresses, and it'll send emails off to all of the elected representatives in the regional health area that you live in, and ensure that they press the government, that they press the Minister for Health to deliver on this promise in the programme for government to provide support to Crumlin. We know that there's a genetics and genomic strategy underway, but it will take a couple of years to implement. We need to do something much sooner to bring this waiting list down, to ensure that there are resources in place, and to begin to turn around, I guess, the services for people that need access to them, and that we can ensure that this happens in a timely manner. I'd like to thank everybody for coming on to the call today, and all the people that have been part of the call over the last number of weeks. Some of us will be in the Dáil towards the end of June to, I guess, give a final deliverance on this campaign. And I know that we'll see some familiar faces there, but thank you to everybody that's been involved so far. Please do tell your friends and family to get Rare Aware and to take action. Thank you very much to everybody. And thank you to David and Julie for their time today.